Call to order this meeting of the Assembly Committee on Homelessness. It is Wednesday, August 21st at 11:03 a.m. Thank you everyone for being here. We are going to, we have a pretty full agenda today. And so we are going to be covering really four main items: camp abatement, an update on the latest impacts of the state budget, update on the civil emergency, and concerns regarding homelessness community impacts. We hope we'll be able to get through the agenda and have some time for public comment. But as always, we want to make sure we get through our agenda, and then whatever time we have left, we'll make sure there's an opportunity for those of you to speak if we have time for it. So let's get started, and I believe we're going to start with Nancy Burke. I'm sorry, introductions. Yes, let's start. Ona, do you want to start?
Ona Browse, Chief of Staff to Mayor Berkowitz. Becky Wynn Pearson, Municipal Attorney.
Nancy Burke, Mayor's Office.
City Council.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Forrest Dunbar. B. Peterson.
Austin Davidson.
Felix Rivera.
James Allenfeld.
Cameron Perez Video.
Crystal Kennedy.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And let me hand this microphone down here. Will you have one? Great. We have someone on the phone as well. I believe Member Constant is on the phone as well. Yep. We can't hear him very well, so work on that. All right. Nancy, would you like to begin?
Thank you. I'm going to take the first few minutes and just walk through the camp abatement process overview and the information year to date on the work that's been done. This diagram is a reminder that we have several steps in this process where we're looking at shelter. APD provides legal notification. We have an outreach team that coordinates community outreach providers. We're coordinating storage when required. There's a camp cleanup map that's available online, and also the metrics are available. And so just to go quickly through this so we can have time for Becky's presentation. This is an average of the availability of shelter beds since April, and this is the first step that guides the work in knowing when to speed up or slow down our process to do abatements. The second one, this slide, is the camps that are abated year to date, or excuse me, it's 2017 and 2018. We had April to September numbers, and 2019 is a little bit longer. It's January to August, since we were active a little bit earlier this year. The mobile intervention team is coordinating with a number of agencies across the community that you can see on this slide. We have some core groups that go out regularly to do camp outreach and referrals to the housing and social service resources. And you can see from the numbers, the mobile intervention team started tracking data in October of 2018 through a dedicated database. And their numbers to date, October 2018 to July 31, include 400 unduplicated people that the team's been in contact in the community. 80% of those are homeless individuals. The police also provide referrals into these community resource systems, and their numbers from October to current are 70 people. The percent of people that we believe have a substance use or mental health treatment need or are in crisis for one of those two conditions is about 64% of those people. And the number of people referred to the coordinated entry list since January, when we started having a dedicated person that was a mobile access point in the community, registering people onto the by name list, has been 201. The camp cleanup schedule is available on the municipality's website. You can see the diagram here, posts completed, in progress, and scheduled activities. This is updated every night. The cleanup metrics, as you can see, the teams are being very efficient this year. We're at 287 tons, January to August 20th. and as compared to the prior 2 years, we're exceeding those numbers. There have been some questions about the different kinds of processes used, and so there are standard abatement processes that are 10-day notifications. There's a zone process that allows us to do larger areas in the community. There is a 72-hour process that is used when there's a public safety concern. This triggers some of our storage requirements. And then in the future, there can be some additional tools that APD and AFD will be developing. This is a list of the zones that we have done to date, January to yesterday, including some that are scheduled currently. And then there is regular sites around the community that are noticed and are scheduled, and this is a list of those. And the last page, one of the things the team, because the teams are so efficient this year, we're able to do is catch up on places where cleaning had not occurred over the prior 2 years or more. And so this year we're able to catch up on some of those locations where there was just cleaning that was needed to be completed.
Thank you. And for the record, Member Weddleton has joined us, and I believe I have a question or comment for you, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering on the camp coordination scheduling, is that available online somewhere so people can tell when the park in their neighborhood is due to be cleaned up? So I have people asking about that.
Yes, that is something that we're working on, increasing communication around those individual sites. Our scheduling program allows us to update it after the actions have happened, but we're looking at reprogramming it so that we might be able to have a list of that available, because we are getting a lot of calls from people wanting to know what the status is.
Okay, great, thank you.
Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question, Ms. Burke, you had mentioned that the teams are more efficient this year. Why is that the case?
There was more resource allocated to the teams, and so there are more people on the teams. And I did see Mr. Vrada come in. If there are more questions, he could answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are you finished with your presentation? Great.
Potentially it was working, and then it just suddenly stopped working. Here, try it. Yeah, there we go. Careful with the buttons. Sorry about that. That's okay. Okay. So Becky Wynn Pearson, Municipal Attorney. Today I wanted to take a moment and run through again, the legal process for camp abatement. This summer there have been a few editorials, a few public arguments about what the legal limitations are on camp abatement. And so I just wanted to take a minute and give a quick refresher of what the legal history is of why we do what we do, and then also touch on some new developments. I know there's one particular case in the Ninth Circuit, Martin v. Boise, which has been the subject of a lot of discussion and is an evolving area of jurisprudence, and so I wanted to talk about that, how we interpret it, and what's happening with that case as we move forward too. So I'll just take a few minutes and run through that quickly and take any questions if it's helpful. So on the most basic level, what are the rules? What are the rules that govern what we can and can't do with respect to homeless camps? And because when we're dealing with homeless camps, we're dealing with people's rights to liberty, to their property, to their possessions, to their ability to fulfill basic human needs. We're dealing with fundamental rights which are protected by the U.S. Constitution and the Alaska Constitution. So that's the source of the rules, the limitations on what we can do. And my apologies to those of you who know this all like the back of your hand. I just wanted to start from the beginning to build up to where we are. So specifically, the constitutional rights that are most often come into play when we're dealing with homeless camps, there are a few of them. First, there's a Fourth Amendment right to be against unreasonable search and seizure. Second, there's the Eighth Amendment right to be protected from cruel and unusual punishment. And third, there's the 14th Amendment right to due process, to notice, and an opportunity to be heard before the government deprives an individual of their property. And I think this is an important thing to consider. A number of the arguments I've heard this summer have said things like, well, Martin just says you can't arrest people. That doesn't mean you have to give them notice to take before you can remove all of their belongings. And the challenge there is that it's not simply the Eighth Amendment. Martin is an Eighth Amendment case. There are these three different layers of constitutional rights that come into play when we deal with homeless camps. And whatever we do has to comport with all three of them. We also have parallel and slightly more protective restrictions under the Alaska Constitution. Article 1, Section 7 talks about due process of law before the deprivation of property. Article 1, Section 14, again, reiterates the right to be free from search and seizure. And then Article 1, Section 22, as many of us know, the right of privacy is explicit in the Alaska State Constitution, which creates an additional layer of protection for individuals in their property in whatever they are using as their home, and strengthens some of the other rights under the Alaska Constitution as well. The courts of the Ninth Circuit have considered the federal rights at play here multiple times. We have a large amount of case law to interpret when we're considering how to manage the homeless camp situation in Anchorage. We're certainly not alone in the western states in having the same kind of challenges with managing our public spaces. And so, again, thankfully, we have a lot of direction from the court. I'm just going to touch on a few points today. This is, again, just a few highlights of the numerous cases that have considered similar issues in the Ninth Circuit. The Van Nuys City of Los Angeles is a seminal case. It's a 2012 case. It concerns Los Angeles' Skid Row, pictured here, where folks often camp on sidewalk spaces. The facts of the case, LeVan and several other plaintiffs had personal property they were storing in carts designed for the storage of homeless individuals' property. They had parked them on a sidewalk in Skid Row in violation of a Los Angeles City ordinance which prohibits the storage of personal belongings on sidewalks. And the city confiscated or took those carts and threw them away. And the plaintiffs sued, arguing that that was a violation of the Fourth and 14th Amendments. And the city countered that the material was there in violation of the law, and thus they had the right to remove it, which is a common argument that I hear here in Anchorage, that people are in our green spaces in violation of the law, so we should be able to summarily dispose of their belongings. The court very clearly said no. The court said violation of the city ordinance does not vitiate the Fourth Amendment's protection of one's property, where otherwise the government could seize and destroy any illegally parked car or unlawfully attended dog without implicating the Fourth Amendment. Indeed, the Supreme Court has recognized predatory interests even in contraband. The case they're citing there is a case concerning confiscated drugs. So the Fourth Amendment protection against search and seizure is strong, and it is implicated even when someone is illegally located on a public green space. The court also made clear that the case concerned the most basic of property interests encompassed by the Due Process Clause, the continued ownership of their personal possessions, and again went on to very clearly admonish the city for believing that they could instantly and permanently take away the property of homeless individuals because the property was located on public property in violation of a municipal ordinance.
Becky, can I ask a real quick question?
Sure.
So you said it was, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. You said it was a Fourth Amendment case earlier, but this is the 14th, is that right?
It's 4th and 14th, yeah. The man was considered both the 4th and 14th Amendments.
Thank you, sorry.
So you'll see the quote on the previous page concerns the 4th Amendment, and then they also analyzed it under the 14th Amendment. Here in Anchorage, we also have direct history in the courts regarding this issue. Engel versus Municipality of Anchorage is a case that the municipality lost in Superior Court in 2011. And there's been some misunderstanding about this as well. I've heard this referenced this summer as a settlement the municipality voluntarily reached. That's not true at all. This is a case that we lost in Superior Court. Mr. Engel is pictured right here. He had possessions that were in a camp on municipal property, and pursuant to a previous iteration of our camp abatement ordinance, those possessions were removed and disposed of, and included some valuable personal property, including, I believe, military medals and personal papers. The ordinance that was specifically challenged in Engel provided for 5 business days notice prior to disposal of property that was located on municipal land. And the court explicitly found that that notice period was inadequate, that did not provide sufficient due process, a notice and an opportunity to be heard before we abated homeless camps. I think that the first bullet point here is very important. I get a lot of questions about, well, did the court say how many days you have to provide? And the court did not. They concluded that 5 business days was inadequate, and the court called out a number of different municipal code provisions in which we provide a minimum of 10 to 15 days before classifying property as abandoned, and indicated that that would be something comparable would be sufficient. We currently provide 10 days, not 10 business days, but 10 days notice prior to camp abatement, which is honestly very close to the original notice period. 5 business days often equates to 7 days, unless you very carefully time it to start on a Monday. Otherwise, 5 business days essentially always is a week. So we're just above the line, but at this point, our 10-day period has not been challenged. The court also specifically listed what property is valuable that needs to be stored. The list included bedrolls, blankets, clothing, toiletry items, food, identification, any means for transporting property, and then this sort of general catch-all provision of belongings stored in such a manner as to suggest ownership. And then this quote is key, I think, in this case, and is again a question I get often. In this case, the municipality argued that the protection of the public from the hazards created by homeless camps was sufficient to outweigh the need to have a more fulsome notice and opportunity to be heard prior to removal of camps, and the court again conclusively said no. The court said protection of the public is outweighed by the more immediate interests of the plaintiffs in not having their personal belongings destroyed. So finally, another highlight, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, Martin v. Boise is a recent case out of the Ninth Circuit that has garnered a lot of attention. The Martin case concerned Mr. Martin was a sometimes resident of the city of Boise, came back to visit, and he and the other plaintiffs in this case had each been criminally cited for camping on public spaces in violation of Boise's city ordinance, which prevented that camping. And they sued, arguing that the 8th Amendment precluded them from being criminally penalized for the mere act of sleeping outside when there was nowhere inside that they were allowed to sleep, because at the time there were not adequate shelter beds available in the city of Boise for the number of individuals who were camping outside. The court, this is essentially the core holding of the case is this paragraph. Courts that are holding is a narrow one. We hold only that so long as there is a greater number of homeless individuals in a jurisdiction than the number of available beds and shelters, the jurisdiction cannot prosecute homeless individuals for involuntarily sitting, lying, and sleeping in public. That is, as long as there is no option of sleeping indoors, the government cannot criminalize indigent homeless people for sleeping outdoors on public property on the false premise they had a choice in the matter. So the core holding was the basic act of being human, of sleeping, cannot become cause for criminal penalty if there is nowhere else where an individual can sleep. This case is interesting because there is a footnote that has caused a lot of discussion about whether or not this narrow holding actually precludes a city from preventing people from camping on public spaces entirely if there is no indoor shelter available in the city. So this is the footnote that has caused a lot of discussion. It says naturally our holding does not cover individuals who do not have access to adequate temporary shelter, whether because they have the means to pay for it or because it's realistically available to them for free, but who choose not to use it. Nor do we suggest that a jurisdiction with insufficient shelter can never criminalize the act of sleeping outside, even where shelter is unavailable. An ordinance prohibiting sitting, lying, or sleeping outside at particular times or in particular locations might well be constitutionally permissible. Now, what does that mean? We don't entirely know yet. Barton is a very new case. It has been appealed by the city of Boise to the Supreme Court. We're monitoring that to see what comes of that. It's also been interpreted a few times at this point by other courts in the Ninth Circuit. Specifically, California has seen a decent amount of litigation around what Martin means. In Ship v. Schaff this year, the court concluded that an 8-hour daytime closure to clean up camp does not violate Martin in the city of Oakland. So there, Oakland was closing the camp just for 8 hours during the middle of the day to clean it. They required everyone to leave. They stored any property that was left behind, and then they reopened the camp 8 hours later once it had been cleared out. The court said that was fine. That did not violate Martin. And Li Van Hung v. Schaff, the courts similarly held that a clean and clear of a park in Oakland did not violate Martin. This is a case I'm looking at in greater depth to see what Oakland did here, because it is possible that we could consider here in Anchorage a more of a clean and clear policy as opposed to what we currently do, which is the enforcement of our criminal prohibition on outdoor camping. That's the framework we use to abate camps. So it's possible we could consider some tweaks. So I'm looking at what happens with this litigation. And then another case out of Santa Cruz, where the city offered either a shelter bed or a housing voucher for use in a hotel to each resident of encampment in order to do an abatement. The court concluded that that did not violate Martin. What we have done here in Anchorage thus far is we have created a system to be able to check every night how many shelter beds are available before we determine whether to commence with an abatement. We know from each of the shelters, from their reporting, how many beds they have available, and we look at that before we go into a camp. We have elected to do that as a fairly middle-of-the-road approach to the aftermath of Martin. Some jurisdictions, many jurisdictions, have abandoned enforcement of their criminal ordinances entirely. We've elected not to do that, but we've also elected not to proceed with camp abatement if we do not have any documented shelter bed for an individual to go to. Post-Angle, our code now contains, as Nancy reviewed, multiple different options for the abatement of camps. There is a 72-hour notice option, which actually is twofold. You'll note in subsection 1 and subsection 2 of the code, B1 and B2, there's a 72 hours notice option for protected land use. We also have a blanket 72 hours notice option, which we can use essentially anywhere that is where 72 hours notice is necessary. There's a 10-day campsite notice, 10-day zone notice, and then the notice to quit, to my knowledge, has never actually been used. That's essentially making use of the standard forcible entry and detainer eviction proceeding in the courts to remove people from public property. We also have a few exceptions in the code. We have an exigent circumstances exception, which means when there's a situation posing serious risk to life and safety, we can require campsites to be moved immediately. And when an area is very clearly signed, we can remove camps with 1 hour's notice, and that's something that there's been a lot of discussion around as well, and is, I think, only at this point been used on developed areas of public parks, sort of manicured green space where there are clear no camping signs. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions if it would be helpful.
Mr. Collins.
Thank you. I have two, if you will. Maybe you could define for us what clean and clear means, and also all of the things that you discussed didn't contemplate what happens if we have ample storage and a place to go. Can we get to swifter moving of people? As I've said, sent some information to members of the administration that there are models being tested in other places that have a more assertive police aspect. They're using our mobile intervention structure on the front end, and on the back end, they're not letting people take ground. Instead, saying, we have shelter beds, you have to use them. Our parks are not an option.
Certainly, through the chair, in terms of a clean and clear, my understanding is that the city of Oakland has a process, a civil process, whereby they simply post camps, ask people to move aside for a period of hours, clean out the camp, and then allow people to re-enter. I am looking in greater depth at what happens if people refuse to move, because the challenge, part of the reason that we utilize the criminal framework in order to move camps is that a civil refusal to move in violation of a civil ordinance results in a ticket. It doesn't result in someone being able to require you to move under penalty of arrest. And so as soon as it becomes, so we've utilized the criminal framework because it allows the police to require people to move, and then allow them sort of under penalty of arrest to be removed from a green space. And so that's something I'm looking into in greater depth to figure out how that's been structured and whether or not that will continue to withstand court challenge. In terms of whether or not we could move more swiftly if there were more resources for storage and abatement, certainly. I mean, the 72-hour abatement is very rarely used expressly because it is extremely resource intensive. And so if there were more resources, because under the 72-hour abatement rule, all property that is left behind that falls into this personal property definition needs to be stored. If there were more resources for storage and for personnel, I think that's the other big piece of it. I was talking to someone the other day who said, well, what if we offered a warehouse? And that, to my knowledge, I'm going to let Nancy speak to it in greater depth if you'd like, that's not necessarily the limiting factor. In order to do the storage, we have to have a person there making judgment calls about what is stored, what's not stored. They catalog it, they photograph items, they make sure they can identify the items when someone comes to retrieve their belongings, and then they're available over the phone in order to meet up with people who need to be reunited with their property. So it's a human-intensive process, more so even than a space-intensive process.
Mr. Dunbar.
I was just going to ask the committee or the administration if this could be available online, this presentation.
Certainly, I can make it available to the clerk's office to put on the assembly page if you'd like me to do that.
I would. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions? Okay. Mr. Webb.
There's all kinds of people out there. There would. Some are probably perfectly capable of working and find a place to stay, but they choose not to. You say in there that if they're able to, you could kick them out. How do you distinguish who those people are?
That's a very good question. Through the chair, I think that's one of the more interesting parts of that footnote, and I haven't seen any case law that challenges that, because I think under a literal read of that footnote, if you had, for instance, if you had a bunch of teenagers who were camping and clearly had a home they could go home to, and were just doing it for fun, and you kicked them out, you wouldn't have to check and see if there were shelter beds. But I think what we deal with is a lot more shades of gray. I'm not sure how we tell up front whether or not someone has sufficient resources to buy themselves a place to stay, and I haven't seen it litigated. I haven't seen any jurisdiction make the argument that they removed people without available shelter beds because they somehow were able to determine these people have financial resources. They can and should move into an apartment. So I agree that I see that in the language of the Martin decision, but I'm not sure how that's translated to reality.
When I was down watching the initial engagement at Valley of the Moon, APD had what they call P cards, in which they were offering shelter beds and even hotel rooms. So it might be on the other end that we have the resource available to say, you have the means, here it is. That's that voucher concept we're talking about.
Sure, that's certainly true. That's what several other jurisdictions on the West Coast have done when they don't have shelter beds. They've offered paid housing vouchers. And again, that strategy has withstood challenge under Martin.
So how long does that voucher have to be good for? Is it, here's one night, I get out of here?
My understanding is that they've given them out, when they've given them out, it's been for a few days, and again, there hasn't been jurisprudence that's determined specifically how long they have to be given out for.
Does it specifically say you have to have a roof? Is a place to stay?
It says indoors. The Martin decision says where there is no place indoors to stay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering how much storage we currently.
I'll defer to Nancy on that question.
We're using a similar strategy that other communities use with rollout carts. And we gauge at the time that we believe storage is needed. There's a person who assesses how many of the carts we believe we need. We have them delivered from Solid Waste Services, and then we have 2 shipping containers that are locked units at Solid Waste Services that we've been using for storage.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to move on to an update on the latest impacts of the state budget and an update on the civil emergency. And I think you're going to speak to that. Thank you.
Oh, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ona Browse, Chief of Staff to Mayor Berkowitz. I'll start with the budget update, which will then lead us into the emergency declaration update. On Monday, the governor came forward with the vetoes for the operating budget. So now we have seen the vetoes from both the capital and operating budgets that have been submitted. As of right now, we do not expect a legislative override to occur. So we are basing all of our assessments on the budgets that have been passed and the vetoes that have come forward. There is good news. The legislature reinstated a lot of the money that was to go to homelessness providers and secondary social service providers in our community. So compared to the original veto budget that was enacted, these budgets provide more for the community and take us further away from the emergency situation that we were in. To be more specific, the 3 major funding appropriations that have been in conversation are the HSCMG program, the Human Services Community Matching Grants, the public assistance, the homelessness public assistance, and the what's the SNUG stand for? Special needs housing. There you go. Those 3 programs have been either fully reinstated or partially reinstated compared to the previously enacted operating budget. This does not mean that they are at full capacity based on the FY19 state budgets, but from the FY20 budget that had been passed earlier this year, it is either fully funded in those line items or partially funded. But the BHAP money that has been, the BHAP and the SNUG money that have been cut have already been accommodated essentially by the operating status of the providers because they were operating under the reduced budget for a few months. As of right now, we are going back through with the social service providers to assess what their known operational status will be under the new budget. And as of today, we will be having a meeting later today with Rural Cap. Rural Cap was our main focus of concern for some of the housing programs that they run. And we think that the news from Rural Cap is going to be good. We'll have more information on that later today. We still have concerns with the secondary cuts that are included in the state budget, like Medicaid, adult public assistance, weatherization programs in rural Alaska, some of the other support systems that keep people out of homelessness have been reduced drastically, and we don't know what the outcomes of those cuts will be. That will be the sort of slow trickle over time as we see those cuts enacted. We are working with United Way to keep information coming out of the 211 program. That is a statewide program, but they are able to assess the needs of callers regionally, so we know what's happening in Anchorage and other jurisdictions. So we'll keep an eye on those things. Outside of those specific cuts and restorations, we think that this current budget will help Anchorage extract itself from the emergency declaration. So if we go into our timeline from our emergency declaration on July 24th, the 2 extensions that the Assembly has approved, now we are going through the process that we started at the beginning and doing a comprehensive assessment of all of the providers in town to determine whether or not the outcomes for the next month, 6 months, 1 year are drastically different than our normal operating procedures. And as of right now, we think that they will not be. And we're working on drawing up all of that information to present a recommendation to the Assembly on the next steps for the civil declaration.
Do we have any questions? No? Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on. The last item on our agenda is concerns regarding homelessness, community impacts, and I believe this is related directly to 3rd Avenue. And so I would like to ask Captain Curl to come up and just give a brief update in terms of any work that's happening to address those concerns.
I'm Captain Mike Curl. I'm the Commander of Crime Suppression with the Anchorage Police Department. So I'll go over some of the things we've done, some things we're doing, some things you can do that you need to do to make our allocation of resources better. We do have undercover officers down on 3rd Avenue as well. We've made a big bust down there. It just went to federal indictment. We seized a bunch of drugs and a bunch of property from them. We continue with the cleanup on 3rd Avenue. We used to do it once a week with Parks and Rec. We do it twice a week now to go up there and make sure the sidewalks are clean. We continue outreach with the mobile intervention team to reduce calls for service at Brother Francis. The calls for service are still pretty high, but we've reduced the calls for service for over 50% already this year. And we've also worked with the outreach team to go ahead and get people from the shelter to housing. Some of the things that you can do, that we need you to do, is you need to report the crimes. You can go to Channel 2, you can go to the newspaper, you can tell them how bad everything is. If you don't report the crimes to the police, we don't know they happen. If you don't go online and report them online, we don't know they happen. If you don't go to Crime Stoppers and say, hey, this stuff is happening, we can't investigate it. We allocate our resources based on where the crimes are, where they're reported. That's how we combat crime throughout the city. We have a limited amount of resources, and we best utilize them by allocating where the hot spots are. So if you don't report the crimes to the police, then there's nothing we can do. We don't know they're going on. You can report them to the news, you can make all the arguments, and I understand it's hard for you guys, but you need to report to the police. We cannot do our job if you don't report the crimes to us. We are taking action. There's things that go on behind the scenes you don't know about. We actually have a meeting with Robert and some of the people from 3rd Avenue on Friday at noon. We'll go over some things and try to come up with a plan for 3rd Avenue, a more plan so that you guys know what we're doing down there. We don't want to we don't want to publicize everything we're doing because that would defeat the purpose of fighting crime. So that's basically a nutshell. Any questions?
Ms. Kennedy.
Captain, just what it looks like in terms of how somebody reports a crime. Does the public then, well, the public would probably want to know what to expect if they have reported something. So if somebody reports something, does that mean they would see an officer come to that scene or call them back or come to their location, or does that mean that something goes in the record and then eventually those records maybe are coordinated in such a way that it gives the police department the ability to go in and do something like the big drug bust that you were talking about. So what can the public expect when they report whatever crime?
So there's basically 4 ways you can report. You can go online, the online reporting system, that gets reported online, that goes into the database, and we do checks of the database so we can determine hotspots all the time. If it's a non-emergency, you call 311. We respond to every single call that comes in. If it's non-emergency, 311, we will get there as the call stack, and the priority of the call allows us to do, and there should be feedback. Once the officer goes there, he should contact the complainant and say, hey, we're here. A lot of times, I know one of the concerns is that crime is, the people are gone. If public urination's a big one. Well, it only takes 15 or 20 seconds, so it happens and they're gone.
That's not a big crime.
But we will get there.
But
But if it is an emergency, if it's a life or death situation, you call 911, and then you'll have the police there almost within minutes. And the other one would be Crime Stoppers. That's an anonymous way you can report a crime. We review every Crime Stoppers tip, and we will look into every Crime Stoppers tip. For instance, this truck is dealing drugs. We'll take that. We have a license plate, a description of the truck. We actually have our undercover guys who will go there, and they'll do stakeouts, and they'll look for those vehicles. They'll do follow-up. They'll check the history on the truck, on the owner of the truck. So everything does get investigated or put into the system. The online ones, a lot of times the online reports are crimes that have no suspect information whatsoever. So those would be put into the database, and then we'll just go in there to identify the hotspots, where we would then allocate more resources to hopefully prevent those in the future. The other things we can do, one of the things I'll talk to your group about, Robert, is anyone in the city, if there's a thing called CEPTED, it's crime prevention through environmental design. We will actually come out there, look at your businesses, look at your homes, and determine what you can do to your property to make it less vulnerable to the thieves and other people who want to commit crimes. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Captain. Thank you.
Ms. Salatil and then Mr. Costa.
Thank you. Can someone talk about who's responsible or who is the right-of-way on 3rd Avenue across the street from Brother Francis Shelter? Is that municipal right-of-way? It is municipal right-of-way. Can someone talk about the efforts to clean up and clear tents? Similarly on Carlock Street, that question actually came up earlier today.
You mean the ones up on the hill?
Those as well along the north face of Ingram.
Sure. Just that kind of other side. So I guess that would be the south side of 3rd Avenue and the side streets there.
That's the
Yes.
the land bank of. Yeah. So I talked to them yesterday. We're actually developing a plan. We're looking at all the calls for service we've had there. We're going to do a CEPTED of the area and hopefully come up with a plan for between 1st and 3rd, Ingra and Eagle is where the old A&MC. And the right of way, like I said, we go through there twice a week to clean the sidewalks. We are educating our patrol officers to go when they drive through there, what to look for, what action they can take. Again, we're bound by a lot of the legal things that have been determined in the court system as well.
Actually, that is a question for a municipal attorney. Is there a difference between right-of-way camping and camping in a green space or a park in terms of the process that we would need to use to remove a tent or somebody?
Through the chair, I think the only thing we've treated differently is if someone is actively blocking a trail or a right-of-way. I think we would treat that under exigent circumstances exception, but I believe the space you're talking about is right-of-way that is adjacent to a roadway, right? I'm correct, yeah. So that is treated as public land. Our camping ordinance concerns public land. It isn't specific to parkland. It's any public land.
Mr. Costa.
Yeah, thank you. Just some words of commiseration to the folks at 3rd Avenue. You've heard the message that you need to call APD and make a report or go through the website. And that's true. And at the same time, I apologize that you have the place that gets thousands upon thousands upon thousands of actual calls and then probably thousands and thousands and thousands of unmade reports. And so you could spend every hour of every day making reports of all the crimes you see surrounding your properties. And so I apologize that that's the reality that we have saddled on that neighborhood and that you face, because frankly, none of us would tolerate that in our neighborhood.
Thank you, Captain. Okay, we're going to move on to the next item, which is committee discussion. Before we move into audience participation, are there other items that the members would like to discuss before we move on?
I'll touch briefly on the ordinance we passed last night, in case you weren't tuned into your TV for the riveting assembly meeting. We passed what has previously been considered temporary overflow cold weather shelter is now all under the term emergency shelter. So I'm going to really try to stick with that term, but know that it means all those things that those other terms used to cover. We passed an ordinance to allow for emergency shelter in 3 circumstances. 1, in a civil emergency. 2, if the temperature drops below 45 degrees, which we're all familiar with. And 3, if the Department of Health director kind of pulls that lever in his or her discretion, determines that there is an emergent circumstance. And that can be based on a number of factors, particular population not having access to adequate shelter, such as women, or as we heard perhaps last night, men with children, so fathers with children. And it allows us to activate shelters in churches, religious assemblies, social service agencies, and other types of facilities. They have to go through an application process and be approved. And what we're hoping this ordinance does is really create a continuum of sheltering options that is broader than maybe what we've experienced in the past, that can be activated as needed. So I just wanted to make you all aware of that. I'm really excited for the ordinance. I think it's a way to broaden our options for sheltering and let the community that has stepped up continue to step up and assist individuals in the capacity that they are able to do so.
Mr. Constant.
Similarly, last night, the debate on that ordinance was amazing to me. I sat up long and hard thinking last night about what I saw. And there was a main opponent group that came out in opposition to the ordinance, and they came out in what I would characterize in a way that was not reflective of the actual intent of the ordinance or the action that it created. And the people who were leading this opposition had been subject to the benefit of 2 full work sessions, one called specifically for them to become clear on what the intent and the passage of that ordinance was. And those people either knew or were negligent in not knowing, because they should have known what the intent of the process was, but instead they used the opportunity to cause anxiety and stress and fear among the people that they're supposedly serving. And I was really shocked. I was welcoming to hear all the testimony of the people who came. That was fine. But watching them be manipulated by the people who should have known was very distressing to me. And the crystallized perfect example of it was when there was one person who was off script, who wasn't speaking the words that they were kind of generally coached to say, but instead was on some tangent. The leader of that organization stepped in and severed her right to speak, pushed her away from the die. And I was just blown away. And that's the first time since I've been on this body that I have witnessed someone step up and move someone away from the die when they still had time remaining. And it was done in service of ensuring that, I'm not sure exactly what, but, I was really shocked by the debate last night.
Okay, I think we're going to, Mr. Dunbar.
Yes, thank you.
Go for it.
Okay,
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So I apologize for missing one of those work sessions I had at conflict. So I wasn't I learned a lot last night, actually, by the conversation about the Downtown Hope Center, and I wanted to ask a question of the municipal attorney and perhaps the health department as well, if Ms. Pineda is here. So I wasn't aware that the Downtown Hope Center was in such a unique legal circumstance where they were not in the appropriate zoning and they weren't actually a shelter, traditional shelter. They were using sort of an extended version of this emergency shelter designation, correct? So a couple questions. First is, are there any other facilities that are in a similar set of circumstances that have basically become de facto long-term shelters but are not legally zoned for that?
Through the chair, we're talking amongst ourselves. I thought there was a second, but I may be recalling incorrectly. Ms. Pineda tells me that it's only a Downtown Hope Center.
Can I ask what the status of the Gospel Rescue Mission is near my district?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I do have a rundown. I can look for a second if you give me a minute. I did at one point get a rundown from the Director of Planning of the zoning status of each of the shelters in the municipality. I just don't have that in front of me at this moment.
And then my second question is, listening to the summary from Ms. Zolotel, if there are three circumstances, the temperature, the emergency declaration, and the discretion of the health department, assuming that the declaration of civil emergency does expire on the 24th because of the budget changes that we've seen, and let's say that the unseasonable warmth remains through September 24th, do we anticipate any gap towards the end of September where the health department might have to step in to continue particularly for the Hope Center, continue their designation as an emergency shelter? And Ms. Pineda, could you give me any preview of what your thought process would be on that? I'd really appreciate it.
Sorry, I was a little distracted. What's the exact question? I apologize.
I'm sorry. So
is there going to be a gap between when the emergency declaration comes out and when the cold weather season begins? Are you going to require?
If that happens for the Hope Center, do you have any thought about, what factors you take into account, the likelihood of you making that declaration, that kind of thing?
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll be looking at the shelter counts and what's available, and if there's a lack of shelter available for certain types of groups that need sheltering, we would address that. But I haven't started that yet today.
Yeah, I certainly think, it's in your discretion. I certainly hope that happens in the sense that even if there are shelter beds available, we all know there's a real disruption when folks have a rhythm and a pattern and feel safe in one place, and we uproot them and force them into a different shelter. That is not without a real human cost. And I think that should always be factored in when we're making these kind of declarations. Thank you.
Through the chair, if I might follow up on my previous comment, I have gone through my email and found the response from Director McNulty regarding zoning. My understanding from her is that all of the shelters in Anchorage that are continuously operating are appropriately zoned and have the appropriate approvals, with the exception of the Downtown Hope Center, which operates continuously, and then whenever we do overflow sheltering at Beans Cafe, they also do not have a CUP, so they've been operating pursuant to the Title 16 allowance. So I think Downtown Hope is uniquely situated in that it has continuously operated, but those two are the social service facilities that have been swept in under 16120.
One very quick follow-up to that then. So the Gospel Rescue Mission, is there someone here from the Gospel Rescue Mission? So the Gospel Rescue Mission, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, is a private, nonprofit religious entity, but I think from our conversations you said that these permanent zonings have to be in PLI. So does that mean that they either built that facility on PLI or donated the land underneath to the municipality? Do we own the land underneath Gospel Rescue Mission?
I honestly don't know the specifics at this point.
So how did they get a PLI zoning?
It is also possible that they predate new Title 21. And so I think if you want a full report on what the land use status is of Rescue Mission, we can certainly find that. I would want to consult with planning to make sure I understand the process by which they were permitted. But The restriction to PLI with a CUP is new Title 21. It's any shelter that would apply right now for approval.
Okay, that likely is the answer to that. And I'm not in any way interested in impinging upon Gospel Rescue Mission's status. For me, it's more finding clues or ways that we might be able to resolve the issue with downtown Oceanside. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Any other questions before we move on to participation? Okay. So we have about 30 minutes, and so just as a reminder, actually before we go into that, I just wanted to make one announcement to remind everyone who's here that next week is it on Tuesday? What's the date? 27th. The Anchor at Home quarterly community discussion will happen. It's going to be at the Lusac Public Library from 5:30 to 7:30. It will be an opportunity there will be a number of us from the assembly there. There will be members, there will be providers there, there will be business leaders there. There will be a real cross-section of the community to have a robust conversation about homelessness in Anchorage. So we really want to encourage you to come and to participate in that discussion. So moving into our audience for participation, can I just see generally a hands raised of who wants to speak to today? Great. Okay, super. So as we've done in the past, 3 minutes. I'll have a little chime here, so you'll hear the chime when you know that your time is up. So I would appreciate you respecting that to make sure we have time for everyone who wants to speak. We don't have a list today, so we'll just do it first come, first served. Who would like to begin? And please, why don't you use the microphone over here that, Ona, will you give that microphone up so that they can, that one's fine too.
Pretty close.
Okay, so that's great. Okay, if you state your name for the record, please, and go ahead and begin.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Roger Branson, B-R-A-N-S-O-N. I was born here in Anchorage, and I was born here in Anchorage, and I am a long-time advocate for consumers and mental health services. And for those of you who know me, and I know several people in this room for quite a while, I came about that sideline quite honestly. Those closest to the solution are those that are homeless and experience it. And I am very concerned for the situation on the streets right now here in Anchorage. The event happened just the last couple of days. I was hoping would not, and that was that PFDs are going to come up. I would say that the people who are in a place to exploit those that I serve are currently on the streets. Not necessarily in the camps or those that I serve, but they're there. They're waiting to exploit them. Many of the people I serve do have our pays, so they're safe from spending that money, but they're not safe from being exploited. And I would challenge the police department to be a little more engaged with what's going on the street and how to really protect what's going on, because this is a perfect storm, and every year we lose a few of my people. And the faces that aren't here today, they haunt me. And I know I'm not the only one in this room. And I walk through the camps and I look at the faces and I wonder which ones won't be here in the spring. And right now, currently, we do have a lot of campers I would call boys of summer, or this opportunity just out there. And I pray they make it out before the PFDs, because I'm very concerned. I would like to see as many faces come spring as possible. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Who would like to speak next? Come on down. You can state your name for the record, please, and go ahead and begin.
Sure. For the record, my name is Russ Webb. I'm a resident of South Edition. Basically, I just have a couple of questions to clarify information that was presented today. In the presentation presented on the camp abatement procedures, shelter bed availability, I'm curious as to precisely what that means. Is that unfilled capacity, average daily unfilled capacity? It is?
It's an average of weekly available spaces.
So what it means then is on any given week, we have whatever is indicated during that month as unfilled capacity. Correct. Thank you. It's mentioned in the presentation as well that there is a MIT and social services circulate throughout the camps and on Panhandling Street in accordance to a coordinated schedule. Is a schedule available for the public to know when those events are occurring?
It is not currently, but it can be available.
Thank you. A question, when the police department is posting or when MIT teams are doing outreach, is shelter offered to individuals, and do we record whether or not an individual indicates they would like, want, and need shelter, or whether they do not want or decline shelter?
We're right now coordinating much closer with the coalition to be able to track a person. The mobile intervention team is that upfront first touch, and then they go into a system, and we don't have the information about how they come out of it. But there's a community initiative called Built for Zero that organizes all of those contacts into a one system, so that we can then see how many outreach contacts a person had before they made it to a housing referral. But at the moment, we can only say the types of referrals that the mobile intervention team has made and the number of those that we believe were connected.
So I take that to mean no, you do not record when you're engaging with individual during outreach or when posting a camp, whether or not they indicate they want and need and will avail themselves of shelter, or they do not want and will not avail themselves.
That's incorrect. We do routinely offer shelter. We routinely are able to say where the spaces were the prior night because we have the app now that tells us that. And we also engage people who are coming up on the community coordinated entry list. So we're able to make referrals directly to housing as well.
The question is not whether you make referrals, the question is do you record their indicated desire or lack of desire for shelter?
I can look and see if we record referrals. It will be a very small percentage that we record as denying it.
One quick final question, and that would be,
And I have a question for you as well. So,
can you provide us, the public, with a sheet or sheets, format, a template for the information that is collected by the MIT team?
We can collect.
Not asking for identifying information,
Correct.
merely what is collected.
Yes, we have an aggregate report from the system. However, it just broke, and so it's not currently available. But we can provide that information going forward.
So it is essentially basically a data dictionary. It provides, this is the information we collect, and this is how we collect it, and this is what it means.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I just want to comment and ask a question of Nancy. So I remember one of the times I did the point in time count, we were doing a set of survey questions, and one of them was exactly what Russ just said. It was, if there was housing available, would you want to go to housing? And I remember being surprised because I didn't get a single no. Every single person said, yes, I would like to go to housing. And I think that's what he's getting at. My question is, do you know where did that data go? Who has that survey data?
That survey was part of the community information we were gathering on that one. We've also asked other questions in the past that are helpful about what was the last zip code that you lived in. That information is now all being recorded into the coordinated entry, the HMIS system, and is a part of that, or we'll ask the question if it's a part of our broader data collection that's happening now. And so that information, currently what's happening is we're getting a number of people who say, I'm already on the coordinated entry list, I don't want to engage with you today. And so that information is going to be less solid for us about whether or not that person would, if they were up on the coordinated entry list today, would they go into housing? And will they go to shelter? The police actually have been giving us information about people declining to go to shelter for some reasons that have been discussed. They don't feel safe, there's bed bugs. So there are some, there is some additional information that I think would be helpful for us to collect.
Thank you. And just a comment that I think it's fair to say, based on what I've learned so far, is that we're further along in terms of data collection and coordinated data collection than we have been in the past. But there is still a long way to go, and that we recently passed a resolution at the Assembly trying to encourage better data coordination between our partners so that we can get the data that I think you're referring to as well, because we've had the same frustration of feeling like we don't have necessarily the information we need to really understand what's happening and what progress is being made. So, who would like to speak next? Yes, ma'am. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Stephanie Rhodes, resident, South Edition, and a little bit of a follow-up. You know, this legal analysis was very helpful, I think, for people who haven't heard it before. But the bottom line here is that as you are doing policy planning for people who are categorized as homeless, it's very important to understand who's in that basket. And these questions are designed to get at that. There is actually no data being collected right now by the municipality for public policy purposes of dealing with abatements and public health and safety in camps that actually truly reflect how many people in the basket of what you are characterizing as homeless persons are actually homeless and want housing, and how many are actually choosing to camp for whatever reason. And the deal is, with all of this legal analysis, it is not a question of whether someone's on the coordinated entry list. It is not a question of whether they're interested in permanent housing. It is a question of whether there is alternative shelter available. Not whether they like or don't like the bed bugs. Not whether they like or don't like skid beds. Not any of that. You know, finding shelter that is in the housing first continuum is a matter of regulation and working it out so that there are shelters that any one of us, if we became homeless, could use. That's a different problem than deciding who in the camps is deserving of constitutional protections so that they can stay there. We have many, many people in our camps now who simply do not meet the Martin requirements, and we're not criminalizing. We're not using that. So the truth is that this legal analysis is helpful, but all you've done is use it as a way of doing nothing. You've become paralyzed by it. And without this data and without this information that you can actually see on KTUU when they do the story about, you know, removing the Westchester folks who are partly protesters and partly recruited but volunteer homeless in many instances, you know, you've got to drill down. If you want to make real policy and you want to balance the public against the legitimate rights of vulnerable and truly homeless people who need help, you've got to figure out who's in those camps. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Okay. Sir, you'll be right after him. Ron, would you like one microphone? You need one?
Oh, no microphone.
Right. Please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Ron Oliva, I'm adjacent to the Brother Francis shelter a long time. I guess I've been criticized for it, but I've always had a positive attitude towards this. First of all, donations. I had some stack-a-bumps that were used by the shelter, and they were disinfectant because I know how to disinfect. So if any of you are taking over a full shelter that needs a stack-a-bump, I have almost 200 of them, $479 each. So on that donation. The other one is for the downtown Hope. I think they're expanding with their bakery, doing a good job with training bakers. And I get a lot of extra bakery equipment at my option, cinnamon roll makers, etc. Come on down because I'm getting out. So I'm going to get rid of this stuff. If any of you nonprofits want to come down, look and see what I have, hey, I'll make some donations to you. Some of them regrettably, but I'll do it. The second thing is, this officer in his statistic of 50% that calls at the Brother Francis shelter, I don't want to hear that anymore. I think that's a real false number, not even close to the number of reports that Mr. Constant referred to, because we can't take the time to do this. They know, I know, they're not going to do anything. I don't want to become a statistic that takes me almost an hour and 45 minutes with 311 to file another report that doesn't get any response. It's way down on their caseload. The last thing is our fine Yale attorney, one of two, circling the Constitution, whether it's on our fire zoning in a crisis. I don't think they should be using that. I think when you have camping rules, stick to the rules. Don't circle. And the same thing with this emergency shelter. Don't give these people carte blanche to circle Title 21. The mission has 2 conditional uses. The shelter 1. Beans is out of compliance if they get the overflow, because believe me, code enforcement, the police are not even going to enforce what's on the books now. And I've been helped the shelter start. I helped the mission get started. And for a long time, I've monitored the soup kitchen. I watched them feed people in the alley. I said, I wish you wouldn't do that, because you feed cats in an alley. And you've created this subculture that has gotten away on you. They overran me. I'm done. I'm leaving. I hope the city buys my property. You can make Indo Stick Park. You can have a campground. You can have internal sheltering with fire suppression. Hey, you can have it all, because I'm leaving. Any questions?
I see no questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Everyone who agreed with everything I said, don't raise your hand.
Okay. Yes, sir, you're up next. Please say your name for the record.
My name is Hank Lentz. I contribute to the Anchorage Press under Natives for Sobriety. I have a Facebook group called Natives for Sobriety. And I notice I'm one of the few natives in here. And I apologize to the public about feeling threatened from the homeless people that are broken and traumatized from the culture that we're still assimilating into. Because we don't just snap your fingers and poof, we're healed. We've been through a lot of trauma, and we're still trying to assimilate in our own way. But, you know, you try to force things on us. You force your religion, you force your culture, you force your lifestyle, you force your choices, you take our voice, you take our freedom, you take our culture, you take our way of life, you take our everything, and you don't consider the individual we're so traumatized and so anxious. Like, you get anxious about your safety and your well-being and your health and your family, that, you know, a person like myself tries to heal, and you keep your foot on my throat. You say that you want us to belong, but you don't give me a chance to belong because you have conditions, and you want to do everything according to your way, but what about my spirituality? What about my religion? What about my way of life? What about my well-being? And, you know, those are things you need to take into consideration, because I'm trying to adopt into your lifestyle. You know, so I love you all. I apologize for the homeless people that you feel threatened by, but they feel scared too. They feel scared, and they're vulnerable, and they need protection, and they need consideration, and they have rights. And if you give us a chance, we would become a contributing part of society instead of being a burden. And I can't help the 20% of America that are addicted to drugs and cocaine or whatever. But, you know, the 20% of the middle class is mostly Caucasian. So, you know, why pick on the natives? Or because they're the vulnerable people, you know, in our lifestyle. Anyway, I think I made my point. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your testimony. Okay, who would like to speak next? Yes, ma'am. You have your hand up right back there. If you could please state your name for the record, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, it's Tani Secreticia. I'm in the West, good luck with spelling that. I'm in the West Anchorage, Spinard area. So my question has to do with comments that I've heard today and also that I've read online on certain motel, hotel sites about bed bugs. And I understand this voucher system and that, you know, even APD gives vouchers to homeless folks for hotels or motels. So is there a municipal sort of option or regarding bed bugs in our hotels? Because once obviously you get it in a hotel and then you have people moving from one place to another, it spreads very quickly. And I know there are a lot of cities with a lot of mobile and transient people where it spreads from, you know, a motel and then suddenly it's in your 5-star hotel. So is there a program or Department of Health and Services that if we know about something or if we get a report from a friend or someone that they experience bed bugs that they should report to?
Yeah, actually, I would like to, Natasha, do you want to?
I'd have to pull up, this is Natasha, Pineda with Health Department. I'll pull up, we have some frequently asked questions and more information about bed bugs, but I don't want to jump in and answer that without my team that is the subject matter experts on it, but I'll pull it up and I can get your card and connect as well.
Can you answer, is it a reportable issue that is dealt with by either the municipality, state of Alaska, Health and Human?
I don't believe it is reportable. I mean, people report it, and it's a nuisance, but it's not a public health. I need to pull it up. I don't want to answer this without pulling up the exact.
So if you could connect with her offline and get the information.
Yeah, it's also Portable Better Business Bureau would be one of the places for motels. Okay.
Yes. Okay. So all I'm going to say is that as someone who once went in Europe and experienced a very brief issue with bed bugs, and there were 3 of them, it was a health and crisis for me. And the fact is, once you get them, it is incredibly difficult to get rid of them, whether it's chemicals, and really the only effective is, I think, freezing your clothing and bedding. So that's what I'm saying is that I think there needs to be a coordinated response, especially if you're saying that we're going to move forward with using like different hotels and motels as voucher options, that we look at this as something as a potential to spread to, which would in turn affect our travel and tourism industry, because people coming to Anchorage for tourism don't want to sleep in a hotel or read reviews about bed bugs, and that causes a wildfire of issues. So just my own personal thought.
Thank you for your testimony. Actually, I have a comment or question on her.
Thank you. While Ms. Pineda is doing her investigation, I can assure you that our health department does do investigations when reports are made, and our code enforcement team goes into buildings to ensure that cleanup has been done. I've walked through that process with at least 2 entities providing hotel beds that were a threat to the public health.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, yes.
To the chair, it's helpful, and I'll defer to Ms. Pineda on specifics, but there is a Title 15 provision that allows the municipality to designate dwelling units as unfit for habitation if there is an infestation, which I think is where bed bug issues would come into play. I think that bed bugs are something that can be managed, so if they're being managed, then probably we don't do that. And I'll defer to Natasha on how we actually handle it and how we investigate it. But Title 15 does allow us to shut down a facility that has an infestation issue that makes it unfit for human habitation.
Thank you. Yes, I've had my own experience. Okay, we have a little bit of time left. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak before we end the meeting today? Yes, sir. Please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Rob Couples. I just wanted to, where did he go? The native gentleman.
He left. He went to the health center to go eat.
He left. Okay, well, I wanted to address him. But out of all of the different demographics that we experience down on East 3rd Avenue, the native demographic, in my opinion, is the least threatening. They're not the people that are breaking into our properties and committing crimes and property theft. Are they drinking excessively and public defecation and urination? Sure. But they are not the violent criminals. And the violent criminals are the young males, white, black. These are the people performing the crimes, not the native community. And in fact, here, I have to leave shortly because at 1 p.m., I'm meeting a native gentleman who's doing yard work for me while he's putting cash in his pocket. Because he walked up to my property 2 hours ago and asked me to put him to work.
Thank you.
So, natives, not the problem.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Anyone else like to speak before we close? Seeing none, just a reminder that we encourage you to attend the Anchored Home Quarterly Community Discussion next week on Tuesday at 5:30 at Blue Sack Library. Seeing no other comments, meeting is adjourned.